Welcome back, artists. I'm Waiya Paints, and this week we're saving the last dance because my hobby homie Matt asked me to paint and build his print of Venom. Now, when painting Venom, we're going to face one of the issues that many painters face on a constant basis. Just how do you handle something that needs to be extra dark? Well, keep watching and find out how I handle that and other key details as I take Venom from gray to yay. So, meet me over at the painting table. I'm going to grab my brushes. Let's get started. That's a siren. Wait for the siren. Be safe, everybody. Be safe. Now, whenever I'm commissioned to work on someone else's print, it's always a good idea to give it the once over to make sure it's been cleaned right, support marks get addressed, and fix any other random issues that may arise. Thankfully, this print was cleaned very well, but I did hit my first roadblock. My client had informed me he had already started assembling, and he left some pretty significant gaps around the head that will need some love, along with some smaller gaps along the legs. Usually, I would use a bit of resin to fill this in, but what if you wanted something a little bit less toxic to handle? That's where a bit of putty filler can come in handy. And today, I'm using Tamiya Basic Putty. They also make a fine type, but for most purposes, basic putty will do fine. I would also recommend having some silicone sculpting tools on hand, but a sacrificial cheap brush can do just fine also. For application, just stuff it into the seam and then smooth it down with a tool or brush. This stuff likes to set up and semi-cure pretty fast, so work in small sections as you go. And in general, you want to overfill a gap like this and then sand it down. The issue here is we have a lot of surface texture that we want to keep, and sanding it smooth would be just about as out of place as a gap would be. Since most putties slightly shrink while drying, you might be left with a noticeable valley. Hopefully with the lines that it follows, it won't be that noticeable. Although if someone looks really hard, it might seem like Eddie is wearing a pair of tighty whities under the symbiote. The head will be a bit more difficult. Try to smooth in the direction of the details that you want to keep and perpendicular to the ones that you want to minimize. And then it's just a matter of practice. Once all the putty dried, everything got a quick priming to get ready to paint. Starting at the bottom with a very wonky base. How is it wonky? Well, you ever see wood bending like this used for a roof like that? Yep, first time for both of us. First up, a better corpse pail. I figured this was sort of a painted plastered wall, so a natural taupe seemed like a good place to start. To be perfectly honest, this lower section of the base gave me the biggest trouble, and specifically this side of it. It feels so foreign compared to the rest of the model. Beyond the bendy lumber, you won't see this kind of wood gabled roof with a terracotta tile, and you certainly wouldn't see a cathedral style tower just jutting out of the middle of it that transitions into a full stone archway. Like I said, very wonky. Next up, somber gray. Typically these roof tiles tend to be red or brown, but with a character like Venom, I really want the face to grab attention, so I'm sticking as much as I can to the cooler side of paints. That way, his mouth and tongue becomes an eye grabber. Thankfully, a desaturated blue keeps things cool while staying within the realm of a plausible roof tile color. Stepping back to the bendy beam with Monster Brown. Here I found a new twist in this base design, in the grain of the wood. Or at least that's what I'm sure it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, the sculptor missed the mark on this one. In general, it seems like a majority of the effort went into the Venom model itself, which is fair. It should be there. But the base should have been given at least a little bit of design time. But it's important to keep in mind that most artists have their weak spots. Heck, you should see me try to paint camo. It's just with how awesome Venom looks, this base is kinda disappointing. Time for some shading. an all-over light tone for the wood, then a blue tone for the tile, this time targeted into the cracks and large seams. Once the shades dried, it was time for some highlights, starting with mummy robes for the plaster. Using a quick stipple here adds a nice texture to the edge of the highlight. Next, I switched over to wolf gray, and it's a good time for Big Floof to come out and get some work in. Here, I'm using a medium dry brush to highlight the large lumps and along the hard edges. Overall, I'm looking to cover about 50% of the total surface. For a final highlight, fog gray. Here I went with a light dry brush targeting the edges of each row of tile. This is going to take a good amount of restraint to keep from overdoing this, but ultimately you want this to be covering no more than 5% of the total surface. And really, that's kind of high. You should be aiming for around 3% for nice crispy edges. Finally, I head back to the wood with a bit of desert yellow. And it was at this point that it hit me. This looks exactly like the fake wood they used back in the 80s for like fake wood benches. So that's how I'm painting them. So it's going to need edge weathering and a bit of malted scratching across the flat surfaces. If you're a kid from the 80s, you most likely saw these fake benches at McDonald's. Memories. Moving up to the tower with Dungeon Gray. First giving the ruined stone side a quick base. Then I moved on to a rough patchy base over the tower proper. I've been experimenting with using patchy base coats for natural surfaces like stone to add more variation to the tone. So far, it's led to some very nice final looks, sort of like getting twice the value for half the work. So just remember, you don't always need an opaque base coat to get great results. Now for a highlight with Ash Gray. Going back to Big Floof just so I can cover more area at once with a super soft highlight pass. I want to try to keep my strokes going from the top down. That way I can maintain an overhead light source. But don't handcuff yourself to this. If you have to switch angles to catch the predominant edges, be sure to do so. The important thing to do is just make sure you don't overlap your strokes. If you do, the opposing grains might just over-highlight it. Next, I'm going to shade with Nuln Oil. Here is just a simple, healthy, all-over wash. Keep it thin and even, and you should be golden. And don't be afraid of overshading the cracks here. With a character design like Venom, you're going to need some really deliberate shadows for them to stand out. That's part of the reason for the patchy base. Maintaining the black primer here gives us some nice moody shadows. You want to jump on those opportunities to paint smarter whenever you can. With the stone in a good place, I needed to take care of the tile here, and since they look similar, I wanted to match the roof, so I painted them the same, making sure to save the shadow under each layer to maintain the lighting. Then I handled the cornerstones just the same as the rest of the gray stone, shades of gray and a splash of wash. Now for some weathering with Mossy Moss. This stuff is in the Dirty Down family, so expect to have a very short work time. So you'll want to move deliberately, as in get this stuff where you want it fast and move on. You can always come back and rework it, but you don't want this stuff drying up on your brush. While horizontal surfaces are easy places to toss some moss, I also slash some into each of the cracks along the face of the tower. While I'm being fairly liberal with the application here, my mindset is to follow the cracks in the seams. This way, the growth looks natural. Looking good. Now to extend the moss to the buttress, and I'm going to do it just the same. Follow the cracks in the seams, and you should be done in no time. Easy peasy. Then the roof got a good dousing as well. Again, mostly following the broken cracks and seams along the tiles. With the base all finished up, here's a great place for me to take a second to thank my subscribers over on Patreon. Your monthly support reminds me there are people out there that really value what I'm doing here, and I can't thank you enough. If you would like to join the Painting Pantheon, you'll find a link to my Patreon in the description below. Or you can support the channel right here on YouTube for free by liking, subscribing, or even leaving a comment. That way, you can convince the algorithm that my videos are worth watching. I'm cruising my way up to 1,700 subs, and I'm already thinking about what I should do to celebrate hitting 2,000. Well, I'll keep thinking about that. In the meantime, let's get back to painting black on black. And I wasn't kidding. The first step here is going to be to paint everything matte black. This is to ensure not only complete coverage in any spots I may have only got a dusting of primer, but it'll also make sure that I have a similar finish to the other paints in the line. Although, to be fair, when I was done with it, it did have a bit of a shiny finish. I think this was due to adding the thinner medium. Live and learn. Now for a highlight, by mixing in a few dabs of hardened carapace, just enough to barely be visibly different. Then using a half stipple, half dry brush, I went to highlight each large mass across his entire body. This is how we're going to add volume. Now, usually there's an unwritten rule that if you want something to be black, you don't actually paint it using black. Now, I've given many different reasons over my videos of why this is, and those remain true. In fact, I believe you should know why there's a rule so that you know when to break them. Like here with Venom. By starting at black and building up, so long as we don't overdo it, we can have a very dark final look while not appearing gray. Now in this step, it might be hard to track where you've painted due to the hues being so close. It'll be a help to have a strong light nearby and use the shiny wet surface to key you in, and you should be fine. Just work your way across the entire body, nailing each one of those large masses. For the next step up, I mixed in a bit of Dungeon Gray to lighten it up a touch. This time, I put the model under a light to try to make a mental image of where the lights fall on each muscle. Then, I went in with our new lighter gray to try to trace out where I saw those brightest lights. Just keep in mind, you want to keep these highlights to within the borders of the previous highlight. As a final highlight, I mixed in a bit of spaceship exterior to the party. This time using Big Floof for a soft overall dusting. This will bring out the pulsating veins across the skin and pick out a bit of the surface texture in general. Just keep this lighter than a fart on the moon and you should be good. Also, FYI, be sure to hold the head and arms in place to ensure they're equally highlighted. Honestly, it's okay if they're a little bit lighter, just make sure they're not distractingly lighter. And these look good. Next, I want to meld all the highlights together using Nullen Oil. This comes with the added bonus of darkening the entire body, but also giving me an all-over seemingly wet surface sheen to the black, so you won't see me complaining. Just do your best to keep it thin and even. Unfortunately, my painting lights make it hard to see the painted highlights, but they look good and they'll show up well in the final look. Now for Dungeon Gray and the very slow and painstaking process of filling in the spider insignia. Now, typical painting order goes from inside out, so I should have painted this earlier, but I goofed and waited until now. And my punishment becomes having to do over an hour of slow, detailed painting. If I started with this, I could have had it done in 10 minutes flat, but you live, you learn. Once the spider was filled in, my work was only partially done, as each of his web shooters and his eyes needed to get based with a fully opaque coat, so many thin passes were needed. Just take your time to paint clean and not mess up all that nice black. Once again, ashes back to highlight these lighter parts. I kept this limited to the large open sections on his torso, this way I don't risk overpainting as much. Just focus this towards the top of each muscle to get the correct look. And don't forget to get the patches on his hands as well. And thankfully, with how dark we've kept the main blacks, we won't have to take this too bright for it to read as white. Working smart, baby. Time to work on the mouth, starting with Dragon Red. It's hard to see, but you're going to need to get everything inside well based in this red. And the only time you need to get serious and paint clean is when you get along the gums lining the mouth. It's okay to get a little bit of spillover on the teeth, but keep that black nice and clean. To highlight the gums, Warlord Purple. Here, I want a small dab on top of each gum lump. There is most likely a name for them, but I haven't a clue what it could be. And while you're here, try to pick out some of the tendrils connecting the jaw. This will add a nice bit of fleshiness to it, almost like sinew. Now, this purple might seem a bit out of place with zero effort put into the transition, but that's going to be handled in the next steps, so just push through for now and trust the process. Now, to normalize the gums with red tone. When you're normalizing something, you're essentially putting a tint over your entire paint job to push the colors towards a specific color, and in this case, deep red. This tint will fuzz out the hard transitions and tone the Warlord to a more sinister shade. And lucky for us, we can be a bit cavalier with the shade, as it should end up invisible on the black. Just don't go crazy with it. Teeth time with Dirty Bone. Super simple, thin basing of each tooth. Just be careful at the root of each tooth. There's no need to rush and mess up all of our previous work. As an extra tip, it can help to keep the gums clean if you paint away from them and towards the tip. Finally, a bit of effect is in order, with Blood for the Blood God. Here, I want to douse all of the gums. This will further mask the rough transitions from earlier, while creeping up the rating from PG to a solid PG-13. But I did employ the two-brush method to wipe away and thin down the brush toward the tips of the teeth for a more natural bloodthirsty look. This can take a bit of back and forth of adding blood and cleaning it away, but you get plenty of work time from all the extra water you're going to add. So indulge yourself and paint it until you like it. Once I was happy, I did the same treatment for his massive tongue. Dragon Red base, followed by Warlord Purple Highlight, this time using perpendicular strokes to build up a texture. You can also stipple on dots to build up a nice texture as well, but it'll take a lot longer. Personally, I like the results I get with this. Then a red tone wash. This really defines the deeper grooves along the length of the tongue. And ending on a good slopping of blood to finish the look. Don't be too concerned with getting this perfectly even. Having spots that are a little bit more red than others looks right when doing something like this. And getting too even of a coat will just end up looking like a red tongue instead of blood sitting on top of a tongue. Once everything was dry, I put it all together and called it done. And wow, look at this crazy guy. While the base leaves a lot to be desired, the focus of the piece came out great. I did have to leave this in pieces as Matt will be driving with this back to his place. So you might notice some gaps around his arms. So no worries, I didn't goof up, they're just being held in by blue tack. And again, while I'm not thrilled with the design of the base, the moss takes the focus off the odd design, and using the heavy moss on the wood kept the base nice and cool so that the reds in his mouth really demand attention. But what do you all think? Do you like the full black Venom, or would you prefer the ash blue version from the cartoon? Do you think the moss fits, or do you think maybe I overdid it? Let me know in the comments. For now, I gotta get on to the next project that I gotta get done before Christmas. So this is where I leave you. But as usual, thanks for watching, stay creative, and always enjoy the process.